This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends.
Hello and welcome to Evangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. My guest this week is Professor Elizabeth Bridges. In this conversation, we talk about her time growing up as a PK in a Southern Baptist church, what led her to never again returning to that type of church, as well as some other adventures in other forms of Christianity, such as Methodism and Episcopalianism, and why she even ran into issues with seeing how the sausage is made, so to speak, in other traditions like Zen Buddhism. We also talk a bit about her sexuality, as well as ways in which to sort of deal with anger towards church and Christianity and the sizable divide between progressive mainline Christianity and fundamentalist traditions like evangelicalism. As you can tell, I'm not recording this in my office, this particular intro at least. I am actually recording this in my car, but this is the best way for me to get this episode to you. As always, just a few final things. You can follow me on Twitter at brchastain and follow the show on Twitter at XEvangelicalPod. You can also search for Xevangelical on Facebook to join the private group. Just search for the name Xevangelical and it should come up. And finally, if you want to support the show via Patreon, you may do so at patreon.com/XEvangelicalPod. A big thank you to all of those loyal Patreon supporters. Thank you very much. Couldn't do the show without you. You can also rate and review the show on iTunes so more people can find the show. All right, let's get to it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Evangelical. My guest this week is Professor Elizabeth Bridges. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hi. Let's start sort of where we always do on the show, which is just learning a little bit about you and where you're from.
Sure. Well, I was born in Bentonville, Arkansas. My dad was the pastor of the First Baptist Church there. Bentonville was not the name then that it is now. You know, it's the home of Walmart, but I think the store went public just that year, or maybe not even yet. And so it was just still considered like this local store or whatever, that there were a few others around. And so, it was not the known place that it is now. It was just a sleepy little town, more or less, in the Ozarks in Arkansas. And we moved from there when I was 5 to another town in Northeast Arkansas, across the state, near, if you know where, I don't know, probably no one knows where any of these places are anyway, but near Jonesboro, Arkansas, in the northeast corner of the state, kind of about 2 hours from Memphis. And he was, again, pastor of the First Baptist Church there. And so that's kind of where I came from.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I know that's sort of like I come from small town Indiana. And so
okay.
so being from a place no one knows, I identify with that for sure. So is there any sort of distinguishable difference between like First Baptist Church and either Southern Baptists or any of the other sort of denominations of Baptist denominations, I guess?
Well, First Baptist was just the name of the church. I mean, they were both SBC. They were both Southern Baptist.
Oh, okay.
My dad was educated at Southern Baptist Seminary in Louisville and has remained a Southern Baptist pastor until just a few months ago when he retired.
Okay. I wasn't sure whether that was a local name or whether whether that's a totally
Yeah, it
separate
was, I
denomination.
guess they were the first Baptist churches that were started in the town. I don't know. Or they considered themselves the best. I don't know. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
it just so happened they were both that.
So, what was it like being a PK in small towns and that sort of environment?
Well, I don't remember much about it when we were in Bentonville. I more remember it when we got to Paragould, which is the name of the town, which again, it was like, I don't know, 9 to 12,000 people, somewhere around there. And when I was a little kid in Bentonville, I don't remember thinking that much about it really. Just like church was just a part of my life. It was never something I really thought much about. One day when, at the end of the service, there's the altar call or whatever. And so my dad was standing up there, and for whatever reason, I just was like, hey, I want to go hang out with my dad. And so I walked up there, and then everybody thought I had gotten saved or whatever at age 5. So I had to kind of play along, which was really messed up. And so I just went along with it because I didn't want to disappoint people. And so that was my official initiation, I guess, sort of. But I later told my dad that I really had just kind of played along with that. And so I got saved again at Bible school a couple of years later. Or whatever you want to call it, the whole like going up to the front of the church and the getting dunked and all that. And so I did that twice actually, and I
Okay.
guess the second time was the real time. I don't know. Was any of it? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. That's not an uncommon thing, to have that, conviction multiple times. That I feel like that's
Or
yeah, that like multiple altar call responses. I responded to one at like a Carmen concert, you know,
oh
when
wow.
when I was like 12, or I don't know how
Are you
old
an
I was.
80s guy?
Well,
Are you an 80s guy
I
or
was
90s guy?
I was born in the 80s, so I'm more of a 90s kid.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But similar experience.
Yeah, definitely. So, yeah, you responded did you say it was a Bible camp or at a Bible school?
It was Vacation Bible School, just your
Okay.
typical like parents dumping off their kids kind of thing. Only I was the preacher's kid, so obviously I had to be there. There was no question.
Right. Yeah. So when you said you played along, was that something you sort of did for both like your family as well as the other congregants, or was it mostly because of the other congregants sort of seeing you as this, pastor's kid that responded to like an altar call when they're very young? What sort of played into that? And you, like the way you described it, you were playing a role because it was just an impromptu thing for you because you're a 5-year-old.
Right. I
Right.
just literally just went up there to stand with my dad, and that was it. There was nothing more to it than I had no other motivations than just like, hey, that's my dad. I'm gonna go hang out there.
Mm-hmm.
And also I'm sure there was some like, oh well, he's calling people up, so I should go up there. But then once people saw me up there standing, then they were responding to, oh, the preacher's daughter's getting saved, awesome. And then in my own little mind, like whatever version of oh crap that you have when you're 5, I realized that people had misunderstood what was going on. But then at that point it felt like such a big deal that I didn't feel like I could just be like, hey, I was just up here to say hi to my dad, sorry. I didn't really feel like I could do that. And so I just went along with it. But then, yeah, like I said, a couple of years later, when we were in Paragould and I was at Vacation Bible School, I had actually at some point told my dad that when in Bentonville, when I had gone through the whole thing, that it had actually been due to a misunderstanding. And so at that point, then I guess you could call when I was 7 or whenever the real time that I got saved. If you want to think of that as a real thing, which I don't necessarily anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was kind of a weird experience just because the whole playing along aspect, which I feel like characterized a lot of my experience as being a PK.
Yeah.
It was a role in the community that I was expected to play, and it was not something that I really enjoyed necessarily. It was
Yeah.
just, if I did anything where I got in trouble, inevitably the Sunday school teacher or the school teacher for that matter, or anybody else would just be like, and you're a preacher's kid too. We would expect better from you. Like I was some, supernatural child who somehow was capable of better behavior than normal children.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of this thing where I was like, okay, well, I have to, be this exemplar for the community or whatever, because it reflects on my dad and therefore reflects on the church and therefore reflects on the Lord, I guess. And so I was kind of, it was a lot of pressure. It was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And I was really aware of it from a very young age.
Yeah.
And so it was just something where, I didn't, honestly, church to me was not ever something I enjoyed. It was not ever a place where I felt warm and safe. It was always a place where I felt very scrutinized.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot to put on a 5-year. I mean, you were 5 that first time. That's so much to put on a.
And clearly I was aware of people's expectations already at that time, or I wouldn't have played along. But I only became more aware of it as things went on.
Yeah. So, sort of pivoting to the other side of things, as far as your childhood and adolescence. What was your did you go to like public school, or did you go to like a church affiliated school? What was that part of your childhood like?
In the town I was in, we didn't have a lot of church affiliated schools. We had a Catholic school in town that went up to, I think, 6th or 8th grade, and then we had a Church of Christ school. And when you say Church of Christ, you have to say it like that. You have to say it with a Southern accent. You have to say Church of Christ. And so there was a Church of Christ school in town, and because Church of Christ and Baptist, two totally different things. That there was never a consideration of sending me to the Church of Christ school or the Catholic school for that matter. Although I almost think they would have sent me to Catholic school before Church of Christ, oddly enough. But no, I went to public school, and my mom was also a public school teacher. She was a middle school English teacher, and she's retired now. But she was my middle school, my 8th grade English teacher, if that tells you anything about the size of our school in our town.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was not only a preacher's kid, I was also a teacher's kid. And so there are certain expectations associated with that as well. But yeah, I don't know, just, I went to church all the time, and, every time the doors were open, I pretty much did what I was supposed to do. It's really hard for me now to think about, how much of a believer I was, because I just didn't know anything else. And so it's not whether I was a believer or not. It was just like, that was the default, of what was there was the default, and I didn't have anything to test it against. And so I guess I believed to that extent. But evangelizing and trying to win other kids for the Lord and things like that, I was not an outgoing child. And so that was really hard for me, and not something that I was ever particularly good at.
Was that something that was expected of you to like?
Probably. I don't know, because it's interesting, because my parents, on the one hand, were incredibly strict and incredibly, expecting a lot out of me. But on the other hand, they weirdly also let me be myself to a certain extent. And if I expressed, this shyness or this, reticence to be a real evangelist kid or whatever, I don't recall specifically them saying, no, you have to do this. And it seems like maybe they were just like, well, that's not everybody's cup of tea, whatever,
right.
You can still be whatever they, like a lifestyle witness. I don't think they use that term, but,
right. Yeah.
By exemplifying whatever it is.
Right. That wasn't your, what is it? Gift of the Spirit? I can't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That was not, unfortunately, one of my gifts of the Spirit was discernment, which which meant that I figured a lot of stuff out at a really young age, and we'll get into that. But yeah, I kind of, seeing how the sausage was made from a really early age made me very skeptical. Let's just say that.
Yeah. And that's totally understandable, since you spend so much of your time in the church building and
Mm-hmm.
seeing the sort of the inner workings of church politics
Oh yeah.
and um, the way church people can be. It's
Yes.
yeah,
And that's kind of my later childhood and early adolescence was some real distinct exposure to that, because there was, Baptist churches, at least Southern Baptist churches, don't have a bishop. They don't have really a mechanism for, moving people around when things get stale or whatever.
right.
And so pretty much, a Southern Baptist pastor either finds another church on his own, or he gets voted out, one or the other. And so already when I was like, I want to say like 9 years old, there started being a lot of tension in the church. And for instance, there was a big thing about allowing divorced men to be deacons.
Mhm.
And my dad sort of took whatever supposedly was the biblical position on that and was just like, no. But then there are people in the church who are like, well, we want to be deacons or whatever. And, I think that church and religion in general for me has always been kind of this thing of just watching people either want to give their power away, kind of abdicate their responsibility to some kind of father figure, or to vie for being that figure, for having that power. And that was really something that I observed a lot of as a kid. And it went right down to people picking on me. There would be kids who heard their parents talk shit about, my dad or whatever. And then that would come back to me. And so I got bullied a lot at church. I got talked down to. I got insulted. I got thrown in a trash can one time.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And then my favorite was the children's choir teacher. They had this system where when you did something good, you got a sticker on your music folder. And, stickers when you're 9 years old are everything, right? Unicorn stickers, Smurf stickers, puffy stickers, fuzzy stickers, stickers that smell, And so, I looked around and in children's choir, and so all these other kids had so many stickers and I had like 2.
Oh,
And
gosh.
it was very obvious that I was being picked on. And so, I told my dad about it, and I don't know exactly what was done, but it didn't feel like anything was done from my perspective. And so I just felt very abandoned in all that. My dad was he was constantly on the phone with, this deacon or that deacon trying to finagle this vote or that vote. And that just went on for years and years. And so it was just, yeah, like I said, I mean, I saw how the sausage was made,
Yeah.
because there weren't like multiple phones in the house or anything like that. And, that was when corded phones were still happening. So, I mean, it was right there in the living room. I could hear it.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
And so I just, like I said, it was just seeing how the sausage was made and seeing the kind of inner workings of, religious authority, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot to be exposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not inconsequential, when that's part of the formation and of your understanding when you're a
Absolutely.
kid. That's
Absolutely.
yeah. And man, to hear that you were bullied and picked on, that compound. I mean, that
went on
awful.
for years. Probably from when I was 9 until I was about 14 or 15. And that to me kind of formed a lot of it. I saw one time we were walking into the sanctuary, and there were I think my mom was a little ahead of me and said hi to these 2 ladies who were part of the Yuck faction, whatever their deal was. And then so she said hi to them because I guess she was trying to be nice, and then she went on into the sanctuary, and they didn't know that I was behind them, and they were just like, meh, meh, and like mocking her and stuff. And I mean, I rounded the corner, having heard them and having seen them, and I was just like, I'm right here. And they didn't even really care. And it was just, it was just a lot of experiences like that.
Mhm.
And it was really hard for me to see this as a spiritual community or as anything that I really wanted to be a part of, to be honest. And, and when I was about, I think I was maybe 14 or 15, and like I begged my parents to let me go live with my aunt or to send me to boarding school or something. I mean, boarding school. What did I know about boarding school? I just had heard of them, from like books I had read and things like that. But but of course they said no. But it was something that I really saw myself as wanting to get away from. And then sort of the faction of people who wanted my dad out kept growing and growing, and they would spread rumors like he kept a gun in the pulpit and all kinds of crazy crap like that. And so it just became this like, everybody in the town knew that this mess was happening. And some people were, had some sympathy for me and felt for my parents, and some people really didn't. And so he looked for other churches and didn't seem to find one. And so eventually things were going to come to a vote. And it was a few weeks before that I was, we had Wednesday night fellowship dinner or whatever. And so my mom and I went into the fellowship, and I looked around, and the way I describe it now is kind of like, spoiler alert, the end of the Matrix, where he sees everything in code and sees, essentially what's really going on, what the real picture is. And I walked into kind of the gathering before the fellowship dinner, before dinner got served, and just looked around, and I started crying, and I just couldn't stop. And my mom took me into like a little, Sunday school room or whatever, and like, what's going on? And I was just like, I can't be here. Like, I cannot be here anymore. And she took me home. And I said, I don't ever want to go back. And she's like, you don't have to. And to this day, I still can't believe that happened. Because that was like the first time I ever felt like my parents got where I was coming from. And it was, but it in such a profound way. She's like, no, you don't have to go back. And so the only time I went back was when they were actually going to stage the vote, and my dad resigned before they could vote, and then we were out. And so, which means that they're like, okay, you have like a week to get out of the parsonage and find a new place to live and all kinds of stuff like that. And so, that was happening when I was like 14, 15. And that's kind of when you really become who you are, when you're like 14 through 17. And so that kind of characterized my experience of the church, was this Matrix moment of just, these people are completely full of shit, and it's nothing but hypocrisy. It's nothing but people struggling for power. There's nothing of spiritual value going on here. And, and so my parents didn't make me go to church. It was insane. Like, I stayed home on Sunday mornings and like watched MTV, and it was amazing. It's not that and I had tried really hard to, really believe like I was supposed to. And like I did these, morning devotionals for a long time. And my parents read the Bible to me every night from when I was like probably 18 months old until I was about 12 or 13. And then they expected me to, do my own Bible study or whatever. And so it's not like I didn't try, but it just always felt a little bit hollow to me. And in and amongst all that, I was a pretty smart kid. And, I would check out books about things that interested me. And my parents never censored what I read, which, again, is a really interesting thing considering my dad's profession. But, I think they were happy for me to just read whatever I read. And so I would get books about science. And I got a book about evolution one time from the library and read it. And I was like, holy cow, this makes sense. Like this has been characterized to me as some crazy, insane, what, monkeys into people, what's that? And then when I actually read the book, I was like, oh, well, actually this incremental change over time thing seems to make sense. Why wouldn't that make sense? And so I had this long conversation with my dad about it. And it became apparent to me that, he's a smart man. He's an educated man. He went to seminary, he went to Southern Seminary when it was not a fundamentalist institution. It was just a normal seminary, when the Baptist Church was still kind of a normal denomination, although given its history in the South, it wasn't entirely. But I think there was a period of time there, especially in the mid to late 1960s, when he was actually in seminary, when they were attempting to kind of rectify their, previous stances on things. And, they had a school of social work. They had, all kinds of things like that. And And so, you know, he knew about the translations of the Bible. He knew about all the stuff that they teach people in normal mainline seminaries. And so when I started talking to him about all this technical stuff. He's like, yeah, well, actually, I mean, what is 7 days or what is 8 days? And, we don't really know if that was eons and all kinds of stuff like that. And I was like, well, now you tell me,
Yeah.
I wish we had had this conversation a long time ago. And so, and my parents have this very weird aspect of on the one hand being very good Baptists, but on the other hand, being like they've always voted Democrat, for example. And my dad's, or I think maybe it was my mom that said something to the effect of, well, we'll never be rich enough to vote Republican. And that was her explanation. And like the abortion thing did not convince them like it does a lot of people. And I don't know why, but like they were just not that kind of fundamentalist, political kind of fundamentalist that you see now.
Yeah.
They're whatever the previous version of Southern Baptists were. But yet they, were in an environment where, my dad also received the American Family Association Journal. And so, I would read that and be like, ooh, what's all this about homosexuality? And the weird thing about the AFA Journal, which was very fascinating for me, even at the time, was that on the one hand, they would be against all these things, but they would talk about them in lurid detail. And so, I learned about all these Dirty Prince lyrics from the American Family Association Journal. And I was like, oh, I want to go listen to that.
Yeah, there is that fascination reveals something that they probably don't intend to reveal.
No. And I mean, there's a whole passage in Foucault about the Inquisition and how they made people confess to like the most detailed things they possibly could. And his theory, of course, is part of that was this like double pleasure of rejecting something, but also enjoying it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's sad. There's the podcast You Made It Weird. Pete Holmes, he and it's not his idea necessarily, but he references an idea of like the shadow self, and how that sometimes wants to be expressed. It's a kind of out there idea. I don't know the whole thing. And I'm not very familiar with it, but I understand like where that sort of impulse is, and it seems to be the sort of thing that's sort of revealed in those people being preoccupied with the things that supposedly they find repulsive.
Yes. Well, anyway, there was a lot of that in the AFA Journal in the mid to late 80s, and I read it cover to cover every single time.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting about your parents and the sort of open-mindedness that they had with you, and with their own sort of individual stances, in that sort of environment where things were slowly becoming more conservative in that Southern Baptist Convention in particular.
And we attended Southern Baptist conventions. I mean, that was kind of our family vacation in the summer was, we would go to whatever city it was in and get to stay in a halfway, I would say probably like a 3 to 4 star hotel, like your mid to upper priced business hotel type hotel. And, one that we wouldn't have afforded otherwise, in other words. And, that the church paid for Dad to go to this convention. And so Mom and I would go along. And then while he was at these tearfully boring meetings, because I went to one time and I was like, ugh, get me out of here ASAP. And so then Mom and I would, go to the mall or go to a bookstore or something like that instead. Or hang out at the pool at the hotel or something.
Yeah.
And so, he was very much involved he never held office or anything like that, but he was very much involved in the life of the SBC and, attended state and national level stuff like that and was very informed about what was going on. But at the same time, I was a very tomboyish little kid. That has never changed. Like that's always been kind of the case for me. And When I was a little kid, again, kind of like they didn't restrict my reading, they also didn't restrict the toys that I played with, or even in some cases the clothes that I wore. I mean, granted we were country, and I think that was part of it, but I mean, it was very common to see me running around in like some, corduroys and a flannel shirt, which you could definitely see me in now as well. And and it's just interesting that on the one hand, like they were pretty open-minded about certain things, but then certain other things, absolutely not. And so it was kind of a weird way to grow up, because I mean, the church was, they were extremely restrictive, but also not.
Yeah.
Like they were very restrictive of what I watched on TV, for example. Like Three's Company was something I was not allowed to watch because it was two ladies and a guy living together, and the guy was purportedly posing as being gay, but it was kind of ambiguous. And anyway, I never understood that at the time. And what's funny is, of course, when I was in college, I was two ladies living with the gay guy. And my dad was fine with it then because, I guess he thought there would be no hanky-panky between roommates. But it was just a strange thing, to kind of, on the one hand, them being so restrictive, but on the other hand, not.
Yeah.
Come and knock on our door.
Come and knock on our door.
We've been waiting for you.
We've been waiting for you.
Where the kisses are hers and his. Three's Company too. Come and dance on our floor.
Dance on our floor.
Take a step that is new.
Take a step that is new.
Leave a lovable space that needs your face. Three's Company too. You'll see that love is above again. Laughter is calling for you. Down at our rendezvous.
Down at our rendezvous.
Three's Company too.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting sort of trying to figure that out as a kid. Like, what do you need? What do you have to push back on? What do you not have to push back on? And trying to find that where the boundaries are and where they aren't.
Because I was very into like Star Wars and sci-fi, and they never did anything but encourage that. But like I wasn't allowed to go see The Dark Crystal.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah, because of culty stuff.
Yeah. It's a weird movie though.
It's super weird. I actually watched
weird.
it for the first time like a year ago, and I was like, holy crap, this was for children. Good grief.
Yeah. That, and I discovered that in Labyrinth too late, and I was like, okay, this is this is very weird. I'm not comfortable here. but anyway, so let's talk a little bit specifically about your about like your teen years and college too, and what that was like for you. You said that your parents didn't force you to go to church again after this like
the Matrix incident.
Yeah, that and the church showdown and everything that happened. So what was it like, when you were no longer expected to go, and where did you decide to go to college and everything?
Well, so after that, I wasn't forced to go to church anymore. I did every now and then. There was of course, because all it takes to start a new church is a resentment and like 5 people. And so, so they started a new church, which they kind of vindictively named Second Baptist Church. And it was like a storefront church that my dad was involved in for a while. And I remember one time my relatives came in to visit, and so my dad was like, "Hey, come to our new church, whatever." And my aunt was crying because she felt like it was a real step down for my dad to be in a storefront church as opposed to this nice, beautiful, built in the late 19th century church that he was in before. And I remember just being like, whatever. But of course, I think maybe they encouraged me to go while the relatives were in town, because I guess maybe they wanted for me to look good to the relatives. I don't know. But but anyway, and so I mean, he stayed involved in churches. He was a fill-in preacher, and then he and Mom both went during the summers to get master's degrees in English. And because my dad's original undergrad had been in English, and my mom was an English teacher and had wanted to, update her credentials or whatever. And so they, during the summers, they went to to college, the next town over, to work on master's degrees in English. And later in high school, I got involved a little bit with the Methodist Church. There was a guy in my class whose dad was the assistant pastor at the First Methodist Church in town. And so my best friend Matthew and I went to that for a while because we were both in a phase of kind of questioning our place in all this stuff with religion, because we had both grown up Baptist, but didn't know where to place that part of our lives after that, because obviously we didn't want to be involved with the Baptist church anymore. But like at the same time, I think a lot of people talk about this religion-shaped void that people have. And so I went, and so the pastor there started blowing my mind with all this stuff about how the Bible was, interpreted through all these different languages, and like a committee decided what books were going to be in the Bible and what didn't. And, all these things that I had kind of never stopped to really think that much about or question, when I was part of the Baptist church. But then, so that kind of unlocked things for me even more, because I was just like, well, okay, well, if this is something that people wrote, then it's fallible. And, no wonder this whole system is kind of messed up, at least in terms of denominations where people try to believe in it literally, when, he pointed out like, well, there's this version of the story in this book, but then there's this version of the story in that book. And I had heard the Bible read to me so many times and never noticed that. And so it was just interesting to get that other perspective on it. And so I, for a while, was just kind of like, well, maybe there's other forms of Christianity that I can tolerate. And when I was in undergrad, I went to the Episcopal Church for a while. I actually got confirmed in the Episcopal Church because specifically there was a really charismatic lady priest at our Episcopal Church in where I went to college. And I went to a Methodist college, which my parents were happy about. Like I had almost gone to University of Arkansas, but then I got kind of a last minute scholarship at the school, Hendrix College in Central Arkansas, because it was affiliated with the Methodist Church, and pastors' kids of any denomination got a little bit extra scholarship. And so my parents were like, yeah, you can go there. And by this time, my dad was kind of a lecturer at Arkansas State University in English, and oddly enough, philosophy, and was also still a pastor at various kind of local churches. And yeah, so I went to college and I took a bunch of, trying to figure stuff out. I took a lot of religion courses, and I took particularly a course called American Fundamentalism that was kind of a historical approach to how that developed. And again, it was kind of a real mind opener for me, because I was just like, so this whole thing of this whole belief system about, this is literal, and there are these 5 fundamentals that you just absolutely have to believe or nothing. And, that also was historically situated, that had developed in a particular political atmosphere and time period. And it just, made it possible for me to kind of really break loose from a lot of that stuff. But at the same time, at that point, I was going through, dealing with my sexuality, which was a whole nother ball game, because of course, every message I had gotten about anything related to homosexuality at home, at church, probably at school as well. Not to mention, I had already been called a lesbian, a dyke by the kids who had bullied me at church, when I didn't even really know what those words meant, other than, demonic. And so, that's when, because I met other kids who were gay when I was in college, and, I started listening to what they were talking about, and I was like, I had dated boys in high school. Like my main high school boyfriend turned out to be gay. And so, like when we kissed each other the first time, our reaction was literally just like, oh, well, that wasn't so bad. And I didn't take that as an insult, because that was my reaction too. And we were like, okay, well, I guess that wasn't so bad. And so, I hadn't really experienced any kind of sexual temptation, because I just, I had only dated guys, and I I mean, they were perfectly fine people and I enjoyed spending time with them, but my feelings, as far as romantic type feelings, were very muted at best. And so I always thought that was because I was, raised in this religious environment where, that's just not something that you want to be involved in. But, little did I know that all my friends who were talking about sex all the time actually really liked it and were into it. And this was a thing they wanted to be doing. And I just thought it was like this thing that people talked about for show or that girls did to keep their boyfriends or whatever. I didn't think about it as this thing that people wanted to do.
Hmm.
And so you could say I was kind of asexual for a long time, not necessarily by choice, but just by like default, because this thing of compulsory heterosexuality, when that's all you see and that's all you know, and anything other than that is just kind of labeled as bad. Feelings that I had for friends, starting when I was like 12 or 13, certain female friends, I would just have these special feelings for. And I just thought that's what everybody feels for certain special friends. And so it didn't occur to me as anything weird. And so therefore not gay. And, and it's not like I had anybody to talk to about this stuff. And so, it was kind of like, well, I don't know. I just have these special feelings, but that's not who you date. You date guys. Like the concept of dating girls would have never occurred to me until I started meeting other young gay people when I was in college. And then I started kind of questioning that stuff. But again, I had a ton of internalized homophobia from how I'd been raised. And so that was something that I didn't talk to people about for a long time, just kind of in my head. I started identifying to myself as like not straight, but I couldn't take myself any further than that. And I feel like a lot of what kept me, not really dealing with that until I was in my early 20s was the fact that, all my exposure to anything related to gay stuff prior to being 18 years old was purely negative. And so that was a process that took a long time too. And then, working up the courage to tell my parents and all this stuff. And their reaction was negative. It was very negative. But I was like 25 years old by the time I told them. And so, I didn't live with them anymore. I wasn't financially dependent on them anymore. And so, I went to therapy for like 6 months preparing to tell them because I knew it wouldn't be easy. And, it sure wasn't.
Yeah.
And so, but that's like, that and the kids at the church are the only real homophobia I've ever experienced. And my dad was saying things like, oh, well, you'll never be successful now. And, you have to turn away from this and, all that kind of stuff. And I was just kind of like, you raised me not to be a liar. Lying is not something I plan on doing. So sorry. And that was kind of one of those things. Like there's an episode of Star Trek where Spock argues the computer into submission because it turns its logic in on itself. And that was kind of where I ended up with my dad. I was like, well, I'm not going to lie. So too bad.
Yeah.
And there's not that much he could say at that point other than just being like, I hate this. Bad things are going to happen to you. And so we didn't talk for a long time. And to this day, I think he sees it as some kind of weird teenage rebellion, even though I'm like 45 now. But he sees it as, and if I was 15 and it was like 3 months worth of, haha, I'm gay, Dad, that would be one thing. Because, I mean, sure, that can happen, but this was not that. This was definitely not that. And so, he didn't come to my wedding. My wife and I got married in 2016, and he did not come. And it was largely due to people in the church had found out. Like, I don't know how he had kept this information, because it's not like I tried to keep it quiet. I was out to everybody from my hometown and stuff, like all my classmates and all that, people that I still had contact with. I had never tried to hide it after I came out. And but somehow, like, his church didn't know. But then my mom was on Facebook. And she was both Facebook friends with people from church and, just random other people. And my dad and I, after the Pulse shooting happened in Orlando, my dad and I came to what I thought was going to be this really big understanding, and that he had said he was going to come to the wedding, and I was overjoyed and so excited, and so I wrote this thing on Facebook about how happy I was and blah blah blah, and then I tagged Mom in the post. And people from church saw it, and then it became a big deal in his church that his completely 100% grown child who had not lived with him in like 20 something years was gay. And so he ended up not coming to the wedding because there were rumors that he was going to be presiding over it. And I'm just like I'm going to be in a Baptist wedding. No, thank you. I'm not going to have a gay Baptist wedding. What is that? Like, that doesn't even exist. And so, it was a Buddhist wedding, as a matter of fact, which I'm sure would have thrilled him. But, but anyway, well, it was Buddhist / secular kind of.
Mhm.
But anyway, he did not come, which I found out while I was getting ready for the wedding,
Oh no.
which made that a real hard day. But that was his choice. And this is where I kind of get sad about this stuff. Like, a lot of this stuff is really in the past, but this is actually relatively recent,
Yeah.
and we've never really talked about it. And so, it's just like I have wedding pictures that he's never going to be in.
Yeah.
And that's too bad.
Yeah.
That's really too bad, because I think he would have had the opportunity to see that, this is my life. It's not something that I made up to ruin his reputation or whatever. And, he would have seen that I have friends and that it was just a regular wedding.
Yeah.
But, that was his choice. My mom did come, and I was really happy about that. But yeah, it's just, like I said, I mean, my parents were weirdly open-minded about certain things, but at certain other things, they just absolutely were not. And that made for a strange experience growing up, but I'm still very grateful that they told me I didn't have to go back to church, because it was just killing me, to have to go there and be around that all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. That's a lot of heavy feelings.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just what they are,
Yeah.
that's my experience. But yeah, just for me, I don't know. I mean, that to me is evangelicalism. It's just kind of adopting this ideology and, using that to govern your actions versus like actual human compassion. And, which is weird because as far as I can tell, that's kind of what Jesus was about. And so, the whole thing just seems like this awful perverted mess to me, and I can't understand why anybody would want to be involved in it, because it's a bunch of irrational beliefs, it's a bunch of contradictory beliefs, and as stringent as a lot of evangelical churches are, no one can live up to that, not a single person.
Right.
And so what that leaves people to be is hypocritical and grasping onto their ideology and grasping onto this I guess form of power that they feel over other people, that they're somehow better.
Yeah.
And and so unfortunately I got a dose of that at a really early age.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I ever really believed. That's the thing that I have a hard time right now thinking about, is was there ever a time when I felt comfortable in that set of beliefs? And I don't know that I ever did. Because even when I was like 7 years old, I remember noticing that no women ever got up in front of the church for anything other than, singing in the choir.
Right.
And that women they fixed Wednesday night dinner, and they took care of babies in the nursery and were Sunday school teachers, but they never had any position of any kind of, governance in the church.
Right.
And so I remember noticing that at a very young age, and just being like, why are there no pastors who are women? Why are there no deacons who are women? Why are there no women praying in front of the church? And like, my parents had no good answer for that. They gave the Bible answer about, the sort of thing people equivocate about. Well, there are separate roles, and you know,
Yeah.
this kind of thing and that kind of thing. But I mean, you know, I experienced my own self as being just as intelligent and capable as the boys around me.
Right.
And it seemed very strange to me that they were treated in a special way compared to girls and women. And
Yeah.
so, you know, I had questions from an unfortunately early age that couldn't really be reconciled. Or like the one where I asked my mom if Anne Frank went to hell because she was Jewish. There's no good answer for that question.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
no satisfactory answer for that question that can both stay with, you know, fundamentalist beliefs and still affirm the message of Anne Frank. And my mom, you know, being a middle school English teacher, loved Anne Frank. And so I kind of stumped her on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. Those within fundamentalism, that's, you know, that's a catch-22 for sure. You know, you either say that the Jewish people have a special covenant with God, like that's a line,
Mhm.
or the other line is, unfortunately, no.
But they're
And that's
both true at the same time. That's the thing.
Right.
Because it's like you won't find, I doubt you would find a lot of fundamentalists who would be like, no, they're not God's chosen people. But at the same time, you know, you would be hard pressed to find one, you know, who really subscribes to that belief system, who could, you know, give them any kind of positive afterlife.
Yeah. Yeah. That's that's a very good example for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Of the of the, you know, the impossible questions you have that put fundamentalist answers on, you know, on shoot, I'm blanking on on the term I want. I hate when this happens. You know, you put them, you get them in a corner.
And apparently it was pretty easy to do because I didn't even mean to. But
Yeah.
you know, I was honestly just curious. I wasn't trying to rhetorically trap anybody as a, you know, 7 or 10-year-old. But
Right.
you know, it's just one of those things where I just saw these contradictions and wanted them explained to me.
Yeah.
But it's just you know, so I don't know. I mean, I think when I was like maybe late middle school, early high school, I gave it my best shot at being, you know, a really strong believer. And we had a youth pastor late in my dad's career, before he quit the church there in Paragould, who was what I would consider to be honestly like what you're supposed to be as a Christian. And the first lady leadership in church that I had ever met, she was a lady youth pastor, and I'm still in contact with her actually on Facebook. I got back in touch with her a few years ago, and she actually ended up leaving the SBC as well, due to the gay thing and you know, their stance on women and things like that. And
Yeah.
but you know, so she was like the first person I think I met who was exemplifying this stuff in a way that I could relate to.
Right.
And so it's just, yeah, but it's that was the closest I came, I think, to being a true believer.
Yeah. 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 That, and whatever, you know, whatever it, you know, whatever God might be, I think God would honor, you know, God would honor that. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
I don't know. I don't know. That's the thing.
Yeah. To me, I mean, I'm with you. I also don't know, but yeah.
I mean, I kind of am in a place, you know, because I was involved with the Episcopal Church for a while.
Right.
I got pretty heavily involved in Zen Buddhism, and that's the other closest I've ever come to finding something where I feel like there's a place for me in it,
Right.
because it's, you know, it's a very strong set of ethical and moral practices, but there's not a thou shalt not attached to it.
Right.
And and so that's something that I've been close involved with, but I got so involved with it that I was made kind of some part of the leadership in the organization I'm involved in, and then I started seeing how that sausage was made, and so now I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't know about that either.
Right. Right.
So
right. Yeah. Yeah.
I just, you know, people wanting power and egos at stake and, you know, all of the same kind of stuff. And I just got through watching this documentary series on Netflix that's really interesting called Wild Wild Country, about a cult called the Rajneeshis in Oregon in the 80s.
Oh, I
And
just saw
again,
that.
it was
And
very, oh, it's so fascinating. But it was very much this cult of personality surrounding this guy, and then people vying for power. And,
yeah,
on the one hand, vying for power, but on the other hand, also abdicating their responsibility to the father figure character,
right.
and just
Yeah.
kind of wanting to be led and wanting to be, told something that's true. And, yeah, I'm just really allergic to that. I'm really allergic to gurus. I went to see, what's his name, the Bikram yoga guy, Bikram Chowdhury, go talk one time, and within 10 minutes I got up and left because he literally said, there is only one answer and I have the answer. And I'm like, as soon as you say that, I'm out.
Right. Yeah.
As soon as you
Yeah.
say, I mean, there is only one answer, but then I am the only one who has that answer, I am not on board with that, because
Right.
that only leads to people getting duped.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Cult of personality is that's a very big red flag. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One of the things you sort of mentioned that I think ties into this when we were talking beforehand was that there does appear to be this really big divide, and I can attest to this personally too, because similar to where you were a few years ago, I've started attending like an Episcopal church and sort of exploring that particular avenue. Because it's very different than evangelicalism, and
Yeah, absolutely.
but
When I was going to the Episcopal Church, I went through confirmation and the whole thing, and half the people in the class were ex-Baptists and the other half were ex-Catholics.
yeah,
And I felt like that was pretty appropriate.
right, yeah, and I feel like that is sort of their clientele, for lack of a better word, these people sort of migrating from like other faith traditions to see what this particular thing's about too. I mentioned that because there is this like sort of divide. If someone is like a Lutheran or a cradle Episcopalian, I grew up United Methodist, and I feel like evangelicalism
Oh, wow.
is sort of baked into some parts of United Methodism, like small town churches have a lot
Yeah,
of
I could see that.
like evangelicalism in them. Anyways, there is this sort of divide, and like there might not be that much like innate knowledge about what fundamentalism or fundamentalist evangelicalism is like in those places. And like there's a bit of like religious literacy that isn't quite there, and how like one of the things that is very attractive for like an Episcopal church is that women are affirmed, queer people are affirmed. That's a very big draw for someone that like doesn't come from that sort of place, and they're finally somewhere where if they do have like a spiritual longing, but they also have this definable characteristic that's always been rejected, like to come into a place that has, that affirms those things is a very big deal, but they also don't understand necessarily like the lived experience of someone like you who, who has all these negative associations with church, and how like there's just this big divide. So given what you know about both of those things, and like how the cult of personality, regardless of whether you're in a Buddhist thing or in a mainline church or a fundamentalist church, like what do you see there as like the biggest sort of problem, I guess?
Well, I mean, it's weird, as I'm sure you can relate. coming from this perspective of having been inside that tradition, and I say specifically fundamentalist because I think there are evangelicals who are not fundamentalists.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about fundamentalism. And so, because like the Sojourners don't they identify as evangelical?
I believe so. Like, who knows if they're going to pivot away post-Trump.
Yeah, who knows, right?
Yeah, I keep a sort of loose eye on what they publish and talk about. But yes, like in the past, Gary Willis has sort of been this blue evangelical, politically blue, but trying to, take gradually more and more liberal religious stances as well. But yeah. So there are people that really do try to toe the line. I think it's becoming more and more impossible to be evangelical without being fundamentalist.
Yes.
So that's my sort of working thesis, is that like as time goes on, the sphere of acceptability in evangelicalism gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So that's sort of my take on it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, point being, I think growing up inside fundamentalism and, like I said, I don't know if I was a true believer or not. I don't know. But I mean, it was all I knew for a long time.
Right.
And so to that extent, I can say that I was a believer.
Yeah.
Because I didn't believe in anything else.
Right.
And so, because I didn't know about anything else. And so to come from, such a total perspective, and I think of fundamentalism as an ideology because an ideology is something that colors everything you see or do or smell or taste or anything, and to come from inside that and then to so fully see the man behind the curtain, as I did at a relatively young age, I feel like I do have a pretty unique perspective on this, and I think that people who grew up in Christian environments that weren't evangelical or fundamentalist, people who were, say, born into Lutheranism or something like, and mainstream Lutheranism, not Missouri Synod. That's a whole other thing that I learned about relatively recently.
It's totally different.
And so, any kind of mainline Protestant denomination, I think the people that I know from that world, it was such a cozy place, and they did feel loved, and they did feel cared for, and their belief in God was never shaken, I guess, by life experience, because it was just a different kind of belief.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really hard for those folks to understand the kind of rabid nature of fundamentalism and how it. There's no room for questioning. There's no room for doubt. And you're either in or you're out. You're either going to heaven or you're not.
Yeah.
And it's very stark. It's very black and white. And I have a friend who was Methodist growing up, and he's now an Episcopal priest who I talk to periodically on Facebook. And he and I both kind of went through sort of religious questioning stuff around the same time. And he kind of moved from Methodism over to the Episcopal Church eventually. And, we've just had these long conversations about, say, the difference between faith and belief, or the difference between, being able to interpret scripture and not. And it's just hard for me to imagine a Christianity. I mean, I've been involved in the Episcopal Church, but it's very hard for me to imagine Christianity that can both, and this black and white thinking comes from, the childhood that I had, but it's very hard for me to imagine a moderate Christianity, even though I know it exists. And I feel like the people, inside those moderate denominations just don't understand how black and white the world of fundamentalism is. And I think they don't understand how rabid it is and how that ideology can supersede all others.
Yeah.
Affiliation with even your country in some cases.
Yeah.
And, even the Constitution and, people, I teach humanities classes sometimes, and I like to do the utopia dystopia theme. And I always have students read The Handmaid's Tale. And, kids that I've had who have come from fundamentalist backgrounds but who have moved away from that really relate to that book in a very different way than folks who have either grown up in other religions or more mainline type situations. And I've had kids who grew up Muslim who read that book that also kind of really were like, oh yeah, fundamentalism. And so it's very interesting to me that it kind of doesn't even matter what religion it is. Fundamentalism is a thing unto itself. It's a structural affiliation, kind of.
Yeah.
And it's affiliation to a particular ideology unto death.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that mainline folks who have grown up in a moderate world just don't understand that affiliation unto death. And I mean, people will die for this. They would absolutely die for this.
Yeah.
And that's dangerous. Like anything that people are willing to die for and or maybe kill for is dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, something like The Handmaid's Tale is not unthinkable, especially not now. And I know that's obviously an extreme, but at the same time, somebody like Mike Pence, if he were in charge, God knows, like, I don't know what he would do if given free reign. And, at this point, we're kind of getting into the world of constitutional crisis and all kinds of things.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, even, there's no such thing as, being able to infallibly rely on even an institution like democracy, because we don't know. And my PhD is in German studies, and so I've really studied the dismantling of democracy pretty thoroughly. And it can happen. And all of it's required is people having an ideology that they would die for. And to me, this is frightening. And kind of what we're seeing politically now is extremely frightening, yet not surprising to me, given the world that I grew up in.
Right.
I mean, but I think that there's just, even amongst American Christians, they cannot fathom that kind of devotion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's why I think, people need to hear stories like yours, because you can speak to that personally. You can speak to that. Like, I've seen this, I've lived this. This is real. This is what's happening in churches all over the country.
Well, and being so closely identified with an ideology like that makes you hate other people. Like, you can't not hate other people. There's no such thing as live and let live under that system.
Right. Yeah.
There just isn't. And so the fact that it blends so well with militarism, and that it blends so well, frankly, with authoritarianism or fascism, if you will, is not surprising to me at all.
Right. Yeah, because it's a outright rejection of modernist and postmodernist assumptions. I mean, that's it's an attempt to find that. Anyways, continue. I'm sorry.
Well, it's like in 1984, the concept of doublethink, being able to just reject something that is factually there in front of your face.
Right.
And that's really what's going on a huge scale. And I think that, the evangelical fundamentalist base that has supported Trump, I mean, had an affair with a porn star and paid her off so she wouldn't talk about it before the election. They're able to accept that. That's everything against what fundamentalism is supposed to be about.
And it's the same group of people that impeached Bill Clinton for having an affair. I mean, there's that entire affair is very problematic, and the more we learn about it,
of course.
But that's not to Trump paying off someone that he had an affair with is just as it's also extremely problematic. But they give him their evangelical mulligans all the time.
Well, and just this idea that he's, this imperfect vessel, or that, it's the Lord, all this stuff is the Lord's will. Well, what about Obama wasn't the Lord's will then? I mean, it's just arbitrary. It's just whatever fits with their ideology is what they're going to condone.
Right.
And, and like Billy Graham's passing recently, everybody, not that he wasn't lionized in life, but people lionizing him. But I mean, that's the guy who made fundamentalism palatable to the masses.
Right.
He and the televangelists are like the people who made that happen.
Yeah. I really like the way you said rabid fundamentalism and rabid ideology. I think that's like a perfect way to sort of describe the sort of inner workings and like the sort of mental environment that people have, and even in some more mainline evangelical behaviors and evangelical circles. Like, I think that's such a very, very pertinent and poignant way to describe that, because you always feel like you're on your toes all the time. You're in this sense of heightened awareness. Like, what thoughts do you need to submit to God, and who do you need to snitch on? Like, who's getting in trouble, who's not getting in trouble?
It's every minute of every day, and that's the thing that I think a lot of people who weren't either raised in a religious environment or a fundamentalist environment get. Like, it's every thought, it's every action, it's everything that you do all day, every day. But at the same time, it's so corruptible because, when it's an ideology and it's not, human thought and human compassion that's governing your actions, like, you're capable of anything, really.
Yeah. Yep. And the leaders always forgive themselves. If it's a white man, then, you can do anything.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, I could walk into a fundamentalist church and I would have a lot of authority just because of the way I look, and
well, and you would be immediately sought after as somebody they want as a member.
Right.
And
and that's messed up. Like,
yeah, you would be quote unquote a good prospect.
Right. Yeah. Which is really messed up.
Yeah.
That's rabid fundamentalism is I'm going to use that. I'm going to credit you, but going to use it.
Another analogy that I use is that it's cancerous, sort of like once it takes hold and metastasizes, if you will. Like, it's just very hard to get rid of.
Yeah.
And it's it's kind of like a meme or a virus where it catches on, it gets passed from one person to another.
Right.
There are all kinds of analogies you could use, but I mean, just the fact that it comes to govern, even people's rationality, it supersedes even that, and that's something that I at least always appreciated about the Methodist Church, was the fact that they did talk about human reason. It was a product of the Enlightenment, and they talked about using your God-given reason or whatever, and that was definitely not something that was emphasized in the Southern Baptist Church.
Right. Yeah.
It was, doubt, anything that contradicted, what we were told was considered just either non-existent or something that you should abhor.
Yeah. I went to a Wesleyan college.
Okay.
So there is like a more conservative version of Methodism called the Wesleyan Church.
Right.
My wife grew up in Virginia and went to a Wesleyan church. I don't know how far into the South they go, but anyways, they teach what's called the Wesleyan Quadrilateral, and it's like these four different areas of these four different things that inform your faith and your belief. One is scripture, one is tradition, the third is reason, and the fourth is personal experience. So that's like their little way to balance things. But yes, definitely in Methodism, reason does play a role.
Well, I know that individual churches also have more of an evangelical bent to them than like I feel like the First Methodist Church where I went to those Bible classes and stuff was pretty liberal, but I know friends from other Methodist churches who it was not that distinguishable from my SBC experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They and it sort of depends on the preacher, and they rotate the preachers in most places. A preacher only stays for like 4 years unless they get some sort of dispensation to stay. But yeah, absolutely. One of the other things you mentioned that to sort of talk about is really how if there's any sort of healthy way to deal with like resentment or anger towards church or Christianity in general, and if there's any sort of way to process that in a way that can eventually be positive. So what are your sort of thoughts on that? And like obviously you have some experience with this. Like you've
Mhm.
you've given
I mean,
several goes at it.
yeah, in a sense, that's something that I'm still working on, obviously. I think letting go of resentment and letting go of anger is not a one-time thing, like sometimes you drop it and then you pick it back up.
Right. Yeah.
And you let that shit go, but then it jumps back into your hands. And it's for me, it's been kind of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 3 steps back kind of process.
Right.
Where on the one hand, obviously harboring resentments is just like poison, and it's not going to do anything about the situation, because A, it was in the past, and B, my anger is not going to affect the outcome of anyone else's life other than my own. And so, I have to kind of remind myself of that, and just, when it occurs, just kind of go, okay, well, I still have some of that. It's still there. Try not to wallow in it, and just try to kind of, gently let it float on by when I feel it. But I mean, it's such a long process. And the thing is, I have not been involved in a fundamentalist church since I was 15 years old, and I'm 45 now. And it's still very hard. It's still very hard for me to look back. I mean, I feel like even not being really a believer anymore or anything like that, it's all that stuff is still in there. And it's kind of a post-traumatic stress sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because like if I go into a church of any denomination, even now, I get this kind of queasy feeling. And, and I feel like that's a response to trauma. And it's just kind of, I don't know. I don't know that I'll ever fully feel comfortable, embracing any kind of faith, fully, because, like I said, all of the sausage that I've seen being made has been, pretty corrupted. It's kind of a Upton Sinclair, The Jungle type situation, and it's just, I don't know. I don't know that I have really a solution as far as that stuff goes, because I'm just still working on it. But, just how pervasive this ideology is, and how much, there are still times, like I can't watch a devil movie. I can't watch a horror movie dealing with the devil, because, that fear is still there, even if I don't believe it rationally. The irrational sort of childhood, part of you that stays with you is still scared of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I know a few weeks ago, when the nuclear threat seemed fairly imminent, and we had that scare in Hawaii or whatever, I know Christopher Stroop was posting a lot of things about rapture anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember some people who are obviously still involved in fundamentalist faiths going, well, you just have anxiety because you're going to hell or whatever. And, it's like, that's your rapture anxiety. And, but the thing is, no, that's not it. It's just lingering trauma.
Yeah.
Of having seen that movie, A Thief in the Night, which I only recently was able to identify, because I had these vague memories of a really scary, like horror type movie that I was taken to at a very young age, under 5, because we were still in Bentonville, and where, a lady is washing dishes in the kitchen, and then she turns around and the other person in the room is gone. And I used to have recurring nightmares when I was a little kid about waking up in the back seat of my parents' car and seeing no one driving. And, that's disorienting when you're a child, to have a dream where you wake up in the dream. I mean, that's disorienting as an adult, but as a kid, you're just like, what? And so, I mean, this stuff is in there. It's deep in there.
Yeah.
And, it's like very recently I was watching this show on the CW called Black Lightning, which, by the way, I super recommend. It's great.
Oh, I need to check it
and
out. I love
It's so good.
I
It's
love
so
The
good.
Flash, and I usually watch Legends once it hits Netflix, but I haven't watched that one yet.
Well, this is a very different DC show, but interestingly enough, faith and the church play a pretty big role in it so far.
Oh, cool.
But there was a scene in the most recent episode where a character is sitting in church trying to kind of sort his feelings about something out, and there's a guy standing at the front singing that "Come Thou Fount of Blessings" song, da, 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 da,
Right.
da, 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 that one,
Yeah.
and I can hear something like that, and it just takes me right back. It takes
Yeah.
me right back to church. It takes me right back, and so not all those feelings are negative. That's the thing. Some of them are positive. And it's just, or when Christmas comes around, and it's not like, the Baptist church is a big Christmas, Easter kind of deal, but it seems like those holidays, I always kind of am tempted to go to church, and I'm not sure what church that would be, but, and it's strange that stuff is in there, even though rationally speaking, like, I can't buy the stuff, I just can't buy it.
Right.
Even as a little kid, I remember thinking about Easter and going, okay, so how is it that this one guy died and that fixes it for everybody ever? Like, how does that work? And like, I mean, I overthought it, I guess. But, I just, at the same time as I don't, rationally believe in any of this stuff, it's all still in there. It's all still in there. And so I'm freaked out by devil movies, and I am, immediately, taken back to my childhood through, hearing a song.
Right. Yeah.
And I just, I don't know. I don't know what it's like for somebody who grew up in a moderate faith or no faith, because that's just not my experience. And so I remember when I was a kid, I used to envy kids who were from more liberal faiths, or they didn't really go to church. Because I just always wondered, what would that be like? What would that be like? And I still don't know.
Yeah.
Because I'm someone who is no longer a believer, but who was one, I guess. And, or at least was very much immersed in that world.
Right.
And so, it's just a very strange position to be in.
Yeah.
It's a very strange world to live in.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think you're definitely right. A couple of things like come to mind where the first one that came to mind is like Richard Rohr has this thing where he says for most of human history, religion was just geography. Like
Mm-hmm.
where you were from and the religion that was there was like what you would be.
Right.
But
Right.
now-
And that's what I was.
Right. But now it's like now with the proliferation of information and postmodernism, like there's a lot more sort of choice involved. So you can learn about things in a way that you couldn't before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The other thing that like one of my professors in college would say that like the way you were sort of brought up was the way in which you that's like your default vision of the world, and it's
Mm-hmm.
and the only way for you to sort of modify that is like he sort of considered as you learn and have more experiences, it's almost like you get corrective lenses.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not much you can do about your natural vision.
Mm-hmm. No,
and that's
yeah, sorry, go on.
no, I was done. Go
Well, my thing is just like, even now, I can see in my own thinking where, things like viewing the world as black and white, or viewing moral questions as right or wrong,
yeah,
is still very much my default mode, and I know that's where that comes from.
right.
And so
yeah.
when it happens, I have to kind of question it. But at the same time, that's the thing. It's not like just because I don't believe doesn't mean that I don't have, some kind of moral compunction. But I don't know. It's just, it's interesting.
Yeah,
That's for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that's a that's something that it's just part of being moving from this fundamentalism to something else,
Hmm.
whether it's I don't have like a pat answer besides give yourself a lot of space. What was
Right?
that? What's the thing that I've heard in some churches? Space and grace. Did you ever hear that phrase?
No, there is no space or grace in in the Southern Baptist Church.
I
I
don't.
mean, maybe some version of grace, but definitely no space.
Yeah, you got to figure it out real fast.
Yeah. No, but I get that. I mean,
Yeah.
and that's more or less my approach. I mean, just when I find myself, gripped by resentment, or I find myself kind of floating back to this time of sitting in church and hearing music and feeling at least some version of comfort from that. Um, I just kind of have to let myself experience that to a certain degree and just be like, okay, I'm feeling really resentful right now, or oh, I kind of miss this illusion of wholeness that the church cultivated.
Yeah.
And so it's I mean, I see what you mean. I see what you mean by that. That is something that I do try to do, is give myself just the permission to experience those things.
Yeah.
When they kind of come up for me.
Right, because you weren't really taught to do that.
No.
You have to work.
Squash all doubt.
Right. Yeah. And so that is something that is a learned thing, that you have to learn to do that.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. And I
that's-
think I'm still learning it.
Yeah. And that's not an easy thing. And it's commendable that you're doing it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you for coming and talking about your experience. This has been very, very fascinating. Do you have anywhere online that you talk about this, or anything else that you like to talk about online?
I haven't really talked a lot about this online, although you could say that it informs a lot of things. I have a blog that is uncannyvalley.us, and I talk mainly about entertainment on there, but sometimes I have some personal essays on there. And I've not ever done one specifically about my experience with a fundamentalist upbringing, but it comes up in other things. Like I've written some about my experience of coming out, and even experiences of like being a Star Trek fan, and how my experience growing up in that faith and in that background colored some of that for me. And so it certainly does come up. It certainly does permeate a lot of things for me. But I don't know, at some point I'll probably write specifically about this experience, because I think it's something worth writing about. But yeah, it's uncannyvalley.us, and then I'm at E.G. Bridges on Twitter.
Great. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining the show and sharing your story.
Well, it's great talking to you. I hope somebody gets something out of this.
I'm absolutely sure they will.